Good morning. Welcome back to Women of Courage. This morning we're going to be telling the story of Annie Rasmussen Snyder. She was born in Norway in, let me get this right, 1858. She lived there until she was 14 years old. Her family joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and after doing so, were no longer accepted by friends or family, and so their desire to come to America became stronger and stronger. It took them a great deal of work and time to be able to gain enough money to make it to the United States and out here to Utah. Interestingly, I found a book. We're selling some used books for the Regional History Center that were in the in Doris's collection when she passed away, and Doris Burton was a local historian in the area. Many of the stories that we have are because of her efforts in learning the history of the Uinta Basin. In that collection, there was a book that I decided to read, and this is where I found out the story about. And what the name of the book is called Good Annie, and it's really an interesting story. It was written by one of her granddaughters, and very part fiction, a lot of fact, and from here I was able to find a lot of other things about her. So today, this is Annie. We're going to be telling her story. Once they got to the United States and to Utah, Annie was married to a man whose last name was Bromley in 1875, and during that marriage she was became pregnant with her oldest daughter, and then they divorced, and she again married in May of 1879 to John Snyder, and this is a picture of them from their wedding. John was from a prospector family. This is another picture of him. His family had been in the business of prospecting for years and years, and they started a homestead out in Jensen off of Brush Creek, and he tried farming, but he just kept getting drawn back into prospecting, so he was gone for many, many months of the year. Sometimes there was indication that he was never gone for more than 2 years, but he was gone for many months, leaving Annie alone with her growing family. Eventually there were 7 children. That included her first daughter from her first marriage. So they obviously did get to see each other every once in a while, but he was gone a lot of the time. So Annie had to be very industrious and work really hard to keep food on the table for her family, for her children. They always had cows. She had a garden. She was known as being extremely good with her ability to help people when they were sick. She was a midwife in the area and helped many babies come into the world. She there's a story told by her granddaughter that is also told by some of her daughters in different accounts, that one morning she came out of the cabin, and no, her oldest son went out of the cabin to do some chores, and she heard a whistle, which was their something is wrong whistle that they use for warning. And she went out and saw a group of Ute men coming. And at this time, there was a lot of fear about what the Ute would do when the settlers were taking over land that had previously been considered their own. And so she had a hiding place that was designated for the children if any Indians, is what they called them in those days, were to come. She quickly made them secure in their hiding place, but she did not want to lose her cabin and her possessions, so she went back to defend what was hers. Instead of confronting them, however, she had just been preparing for dinner and had a fresh loaf of bread and soup ready to go in the house, and she invited these men into her home to eat with her. They seemed quite surprised at the offer, but they took her up on it, and they stayed until there was no food left. The bread was gone, the soup was gone, and they still sat in her home until suddenly they stood up and decided to leave. And on the way out of the door, she was trying to tell them, "My name is Annie. You can come back." And one of the young Ute men said, "Good Annie." From that time, she was known as Good Annie and had many experiences with the Ute people in her area. I found a map that shows the original reservation from 1880, which would be right around the time that this was happening. If you see, this is Jensen right here. The reservation was south of Jensen, but very close. And so it wouldn't be unusual for Ute men to be riding their horses through that area. And she said that there were times when, there was one day when her wagon disappeared. Her son came and said, "The wagon's gone." And she said, "It can't be gone." And he said, "It's gone." And she went to investigate, and sure enough, the wagon was gone. Later in the evening, the wagon came over the hill. A group of Ute men had gone and gotten her wood for her use for the winter for burning, and they continued to do that once a week until there was enough wood that she would not have to worry about any of her heating needs for that year. They would come to her when there was sickness and ask for help. She became very well known, and they, as I said, called her Good Annie. There is a story about when her son went from boyhood to manhood in that growth spurt that they always have. He was going down with the wagon into the reservation to get the wood where they had previously taken him. He had, in the years that followed, they continued to get her wood for her, but her boys began to help them. And they had not seen him for a while, and he was in the wagon heading for the wood, and he was surrounded by a group of Ute men that felt that he was there to steal their wood, not knowing who he was. And they threatened to kill him and were discussing how they were going to go about it, when one of the older ones looked closer at his face and said, "You good Annie's boy?" And he said yes. And then they not only helped him get wood, but made sure he was safe as he left the reservation. So they had a very good relationship with the Ute people that they lived near because of her kindness. There is a story told about one day when an elderly man with a long beard came to her home and asked if he could rest. And when he sat in her home, he asked her if she would wash his feet. And she got him some water and started to wash his feet. And while she was doing that, he started telling her about all kinds of herbs and that could be used for medicinal purposes, and how to use them and how to prepare them. And she served him dinner, and he continued talking to her through the whole time, giving her information on how best to use certain herbs for her medicinal needs. And as he prepared to leave, she thought in wonder about all that she had learned from this man. He went out the door, and she suddenly realized she wanted to follow him, and she went out and could see a few footprints, and then all of evidence of him having been there disappeared. He just kind of vanished into thin air. She was always very grateful for that time, and she used the information that she gleaned from this man for the rest of her life. She had many sorrows. There was one period of time when John did come home. He had found a really good claim and had sold it and came home with some gold, and he told her that he was going to buy a ranch and stay home. She was ecstatic, and he purchased some land on the mountain, and they began ranching. They had cattle and sheep. Her sons were getting older, and they were very helpful, and they spent a lot of time on the mountain. But eventually, John just missed his prospecting so much that he again left the area. And one of the trips, he took a son and one of his daughters with him on a boat down the Green River, starting at Jensen, and went all the way to Green River, Utah. He was gone for a really long time. They had some real problems. They lost the boat eventually. He got so ill that he told the children they would have to bury him by morning. It was a really long, arduous trip. They ran out of food. Eventually, they made it to Green River. And during this time, Annie was so concerned about them that she became mentally depressed enough that she was put into a home in Provo, Utah area for a while. Her nerves had been so depleted by the fear of her having lost her husband and two children. There was a reason she had these kind of fears. There was one time when fording either the Ashley Creek, one family member says it was Ashley Creek, one said it was Brush Creek. The spring waters were coming down, and they were trying to beat the really bad part of it to get home, and one of her little baby was being held by her oldest daughter, or one of her daughters, I don't think it was her oldest one, was swept out of her arms when the wagon got in too deep, and the baby was washed away into eventually the Green River. They never did find him. It was a tremendous sorrow for her. Another time, her 2-year-old, one of her children, again a little boy. So this was, the first one was a 6-month-old baby, and then a 3-year-old son was found in the irrigation ditch, and he had also drowned. These two experiences had made her, just broken her heart, and she then taught her children how to swim. She was not going to have that happen again, and it said that her boys could swim across the Green River. They were such strong swimmers. Eventually, she did divorce John. He just never would come back and stay with her. And he went on to keep prospecting for the rest of his life. She died in 1909, and just a month before she died, she remarried. And there was only a couple of weeks, and she passed away at 51. She had died of some liver ailments. But in the time that she had lived, she had blessed just so many lives. She was buried in the Mazer Cemetery, and on her tombstone, it does not put her last name, which was Hards. It left her as Annie Snyder. I think that was because there was so little time that she lived as Mrs. Hards. She, I'm just looking here to see. This is a photograph of she with her surviving children. And this is her oldest son. He started trapping for the government, and he disappeared and never came home. So at the time of her death, she didn't know where he was, which was another big sorrow for her life. In family history, we've found that he did go on to live. He was drafted into the First World War, and he listed her as his mother. Annie wrote many poems in her life, and this is one of them that I truly loved. It says, "Live for those who love you, for those you know are true, for the heavens that shine above you, and the good that you can do. True friends are like diamonds, precious but rare. False friends are like autumn leaves, found everywhere." She lived through many sorrows in her life, and yet she was known because of her good works as Good Annie. I hope you enjoyed the story of Annie today, and we will see you next week.